Man gets kicked out of his own business. Staff had no idea he was the owner. The aroma of freshly ground coffee beans wafted through the morning air as James Hawthorne unlocked the front door of Hawthorne's Corner Cafe. The familiar jingle of keys and the soft click of the lock echoed in the empty street, a sound that had become as much a part of his daily routine as breathing. The pale winter sun had barely begun to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the weathered brick facade of the building that had been in his family for 3 generations. Before we can continue, if you love your family, subscribe to this channel to help spread amazing stories. Let's continue. James paused for a moment, his hand resting on the brass door handle, taking in the quiet before the day began. At 42, he cut an unremarkable figure, average height, with slightly graying temples and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His worn brown leather shoes and simple button-down shirt made him indistinguishable from any other working professional in the neighborhood. This was exactly how he preferred it. Inside, the cafe held the lingering warmth of yesterday's busy service, along with the faint sweetness of pastries and the earthiness of coffee that seemed permanently embedded in the walls. James moved through the darkness with practiced ease, his fingers finding light switches without hesitation. The cafe came to life gradually, first the soft ambient lights, then the gentle hum of refrigerators being checked, and finally the whir of coffee machines warming up. He began his morning ritual, moving through the space like a conductor preparing his orchestra. The chairs came down from the tables with barely a sound, each one placed just so. The display cases would soon be filled with fresh pastries, delivered by Marcus from the local bakery in an hour. The espresso machines needed their morning cleaning, and James took particular pleasure in this task, treating the equipment with the same care one might show a beloved instrument. The first staff member to arrive was always Sarah, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun, usually 5 minutes early for her shift. She would burst through the door with an energy that seemed impossible for 5:55 a.m., her cheerful morning gem bouncing off the walls. James would respond with his usual quiet smile and nod, playing his part as the reliable manager rather than the owner. Today was no different. Sarah sailed in, bringing with her the crisp morning air and the faint scent of her floral perfume. "You wouldn't believe the traffic already," she exclaimed, though they both knew the streets were nearly empty at this hour. It was just Sarah's way, making every day feel like an adventure waiting to happen. James watched as she tied her apron with practiced efficiency, her fingers moving quickly through the familiar motions. She had been with the cafe for 3 years now, and in that time, he had watched her grow from a nervous newcomer to one of their most confident baristas. Yet she still had no idea that the quiet manager who helped her learn to steam milk perfectly was actually the owner of the establishment. The morning continued its gentle awakening as more staff members filtered in. Thomas arrived next, his college textbook tucked under his arm as always, ready to study during the quiet moments. Then came Maria, who had worked at the cafe longer than anyone else except James himself, her silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, but her smile warm and genuine. Each of them knew him simply as Jim, the dependable manager who seemed to know every aspect of the cafe's operation intimately. They shared their lives with him in casual conversations between customers, their dreams, their struggles, their small daily victories. James treasured these moments, these glimpses into the lives of the people who helped make his family's legacy thrive. The regulars began arriving as the sun climbed higher in the sky. First was Mr. Peterson, a retired English teacher who ordered the same thing every morning, a medium dark roast coffee and a blueberry scone. He would settle into the corner table with his newspaper, creating a familiar silhouette that seemed as much a part of the cafe as the vintage coffee grinder displayed near the counter. James moved between tasks with quiet efficiency, helping where needed, observing more often than speaking. He took pride in knowing exactly when to step in and when to let his staff handle things on their own. Behind the counter, Sarah was teaching Thomas the art of latte art, their heads bent together over the steaming cup as she guided his hand through the motions. Maria worked the register with practiced grace, greeting customers by name and remembering their usual orders before they could speak them. James watched as she handled a particularly indecisive newcomer with patience and warmth, offering suggestions based on subtle cues that only years of experience could teach. This was the kind of service he had always envisioned for his cafe: personal, genuine, caring. The morning rush ebbed and flowed like a tide, bringing with it the usual mix of hurried professionals, leisurely retirees, and students from the nearby university. James moved through it all like a silent guardian, refilling the coffee urns, restocking supplies, and occasionally stepping in to help during particularly busy moments. His staff worked around him with the comfortable familiarity of a well-rehearsed dance, each person knowing their role and executing it with precision. During a brief lull, James retreated to the small office tucked away behind the kitchen. The space was barely larger than a closet, with just enough room for a desk, a filing cabinet, and a small safe. Here, surrounded by invoices and scheduling sheets, he allowed himself a moment to be the owner rather than just the manager. He reviewed the previous day's receipts, made notes about inventory, and updated the staff schedule for the coming week. The walls of the office told the story of the cafe's history. Old photographs showing his grandfather standing proudly in front of the newly opened establishment in 1945, his father's first dollar bill earned as owner framed and hanging slightly askew, and a faded review from the local newspaper praising the cafe's commitment to quality and community. James had added very few personal touches to the space, maintaining his carefully crafted image of the unassuming manager. Through the thin walls, he could hear the chatter of his staff during their quieter moments. Sarah was telling Thomas about her plans to travel to Europe next summer, her voice animated with excitement. Maria was humming softly as she restocked the pastry case, a habit she'd had for as long as James could remember. These moments of casual interaction, of genuine human connection, were what made the cafe more than just a business to him. The afternoon sun streamed through the cafe's large windows, creating patterns on the hardwood floors that shifted with the passing hours. James emerged from the office to find the atmosphere had shifted to the quieter, more relaxed pace of mid-afternoon. A few regulars lingered over their laptops, the soft tapping of keyboards mixing with the ambient music playing quietly through the speakers. He watched as Thomas handled a complicated order from a group of students, maintaining his composure even as they changed their minds multiple times. The young man had grown more confident in recent months, and James felt a quiet pride in his development. This was one of the most rewarding aspects of his role, seeing his employees grow and improve, even if they didn't know how closely he watched their progress. As the day wore on, James continued his careful ballet of being present without being prominent. He wiped down tables, assisted with dishes during busy periods, and kept the coffee flowing. His employees treated him with a casual friendliness reserved for a trusted coworker, sharing jokes and stories, completely unaware that their everyday interactions were with the person who signed their paychecks. The cafe's rhythm continued its steady beat as afternoon faded into evening. The after-work crowd brought their own energy, tired professionals seeking a moment of peace before heading home, young couples meeting for casual dates, and students settling in for long study sessions. James adjusted the music and lighting subtly, creating the perfect atmosphere for this transition in the day. The first signs of change were subtle, like hairline cracks in fine china that you might miss unless you knew exactly where to look. James noticed them during the quiet moments between rushes, in the small details that others might dismiss as insignificant. The pristine shine of the espresso machine had dulled slightly, with coffee residue building up in corners that used to be meticulously cleaned. The arrangement of pastries in the display case, once artfully presented, had become haphazard and thoughtless. Sarah's infectious morning energy now seemed forced, her cheerful greetings carrying an undertone of obligation rather than genuine warmth. James observed her checking her phone more frequently during shifts, her attention divided between customers and whatever drew her gaze to the screen. The latte art she had once practiced with such dedication had become rushed, hearts and rosettas giving way to hasty swirls that barely qualified as designs. Thomas, who used to balance his studies with work so efficiently, now spent more time discussing upcoming exams with co-workers than attending to waiting customers. His textbooks lay open behind the counter, but instead of studying during quiet moments, he would engage in lengthy conversations about weekend plans and parties. The careful attention he once paid to grinding coffee beans to the perfect consistency had been replaced by a cavalier approach that made James wince internally. Even Maria, his most reliable employee, had begun to show signs of complacency. Her signature humming had taken on a distracted quality, and her once impeccable memory for regular customers' orders had started to falter. She would catch herself, playing it off with a laugh and a casual senior moment. But James knew it wasn't age affecting her performance. It was indifference. During the morning rush, James noticed more customers checking their watches impatiently, the line moving slower than it should. The symphony of efficiency he had cultivated over years had developed discordant notes. Where staff members once moved in harmonious coordination, they now bumped into each other, apologizing distractedly before returning to their private conversations. The cafe's walls seemed to absorb the changing atmosphere, the warm ambience giving way to something less welcoming. Regular customers who used to linger for hours now finished their drinks quickly and left, their familiar faces appearing less frequently as weeks passed. Mr. Peterson, their faithful morning customer, had begun bringing his own coffee in a thermos, though he still bought his daily scone. The slight frown on his face, as he settled into his corner, spoke volumes to James. One particularly busy Saturday morning, James watched as a new customer waited at the counter while Sarah and Thomas engaged in an animated discussion about a concert they'd attended the night before. The woman's expression shifted from patience to frustration, and finally to resignation as she turned and left without ordering. Neither employee noticed her departure, too engrossed in their conversation about the opening act's performance. In the small office that afternoon, James sat at his desk, the day's receipts spread before him, but his mind was elsewhere. The numbers told their own story: subtle but consistent decreases in daily sales, fewer repeat customers, a growing stack of comment cards expressing disappointment with service and quality. He pulled out his leather-bound notebook, where he had begun documenting his observations, each entry a testament to the growing distance between his vision for the cafe and its current reality. The weight of his family's legacy pressed heavily on his shoulders as he reviewed his notes. His grandfather had built this cafe from nothing, working endless hours to create a place that served not just coffee but community. His father had maintained those standards through decades of economic ups and downs, never compromising on quality or service. Now, under James's quiet stewardship, the cafe seemed to be losing its soul. During the afternoon lull, James overheard a conversation that crystallized his growing concerns. Two regular customers, both writers who had used the cafe as their unofficial office for years, were discussing their recent experiences. "It's not the same anymore," one murmured to the other, stirring her now cold coffee. "Remember how they used to remember exactly how we liked our drinks? Now I have to repeat my order every time, and half the time it's still wrong." Her companion nodded, closing his laptop with a sigh. "I've started going to that new place 3 blocks over. It's not as charming, but at least the staff seems to care." They gathered their belongings and left, the bell above the door chiming their departure with what seemed to James like a note of finality. That evening, as he walked through the cafe after closing, James noticed how the day's negligence had accumulated. Crumbs littered the corners of tables that should have been wiped clean. The milk pitchers hadn't been properly sanitized, and the coffee grinder needed cleaning. The floor behind the counter was sticky with spilled syrup that no one had bothered to mop properly. As he began to clean, methodically addressing each oversight, James found himself reflecting on his role in allowing this decline. His hands moved automatically through the familiar motions of maintenance, while his mind worked through possible solutions. The practice of staying in the background, of being the unassuming manager rather than the engaged owner, had allowed him to observe but had perhaps also prevented him from leading effectively. A half-written schedule for the following week sat abandoned on the office desk, coffee rings staining its corners. James picked it up, studying the names and shifts that had become so familiar. Each person on that schedule had shown promise once, had contributed to the cafe's warm atmosphere and reputation for excellence. Somewhere along the way, they had lost sight of what made Hawthorne's Corner Cafe special. The solution began to form in his mind, tentative at first, but gaining clarity with each passing moment. If he wanted to understand the true nature of his cafe's operation, He needed to see it from a different perspective. Not as Jim the manager, whose presence might influence behavior, but as someone invisible, someone the staff might dismiss or ignore. James ran his fingers along the smooth surface of the counter, feeling the generations of care and pride that had gone into maintaining this space. He couldn't stand by and watch it deteriorate further. The decision solidified in his mind. He would step away from his role as manager, but not to abandon the cafe. Instead, he would return in a different capacity, one that would allow him to observe without the filter of authority. The transformation from Jim the manager to James Wilson, the new cleaning staff, required more than just a change of clothes. Standing before his bathroom mirror at home, James studied his reflection as he applied the temporary hair dye that would cover his graying temples. He had carefully cultivated this new identity, choosing a background that would seem unremarkable to his employees. A middle-aged man who had lost his previous job due to corporate downsizing, grateful for any work he could find. He had arranged everything meticulously. 2 weeks ago, he had announced his temporary departure to the staff, citing family obligations that would require him to be away for an indefinite period. Maria had been appointed interim manager, a role she accepted with a mixture of pride and nervous energy. The staff had given him a casual send-off, complete with a grocery store cake and a card signed with hasty good wishes. Their relief at his departure had been poorly concealed, another sign of how far things had slipped. Now, wearing faded jeans and a worn work shirt that had never seen the inside of his usual wardrobe, James pulled into the cafe's parking lot 30 minutes earlier than his new position required. The winter morning was darker than usual, heavy clouds threatening rain. He sat in his car, not his usual sensible sedan, but an older model borrowed from his brother, and watched the familiar opening routine from the outside. Sarah arrived first, as always, but today she was 7 minutes late. She fumbled with the keys at the door, balancing her phone between her shoulder and ear as she engaged in an animated conversation about someone's relationship drama. The lights came on in sporadic chunks rather than the methodical progression James had always followed. The chairs came down from the tables with loud scrapes that made him wince. Taking a deep breath, James emerged from his car, shoulders slightly hunched, adopting the posture of someone who would rather not be noticed. The weight of the unfamiliar work boots on his feet helped ground him in his new role. He pushed open the front door, the familiar bell chiming overhead, but this time he wasn't greeted with the usual warmth reserved for the manager. Sarah barely glanced up from her phone, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the cafe. "You must be the new cleaning guy," she said, not bothering to end her phone conversation. "Maria's in the office. She'll tell you what to do." She turned away, laughing at something her phone companion had said, leaving James standing awkwardly in the entrance of his own cafe. The walk to his office, now Maria's office, felt surreal. The space he had occupied just days ago had already transformed. Maria sat at the desk, surrounded by scattered papers and empty coffee cups, looking harried. She glanced up as he appeared in the doorway, her expression distracted. "James Wilson? Right, the new cleaner. Look, it's pretty straightforward. Floors need mopping, bathrooms need cleaning, tables need wiping. Cleaning supplies are in the storage closet. Just keep things tidy and stay out of the way during rush hours." The dismissive wave of her hand felt like a physical blow. James nodded silently, playing his role of the grateful new employee. "Thank you, I'll do my best," he murmured, his voice pitched slightly lower than usual. Maria had already turned back to her paperwork, clearly considering the interaction complete. As James retrieved the cleaning supplies from the storage closet, he realized how little attention he had paid to this aspect of the cafe's operation. The mop bucket had a crack in it, the cleaning solutions were running low, and the rags were frayed and stained. These basic tools, essential to maintaining the cafe's appearance, had been neglected, another oversight he had failed to notice from his position of authority. The morning rush began, and James found himself navigating an entirely new perspective of his cafe. While he had always been aware of the flow of customers and staff, being essentially invisible offered a stark new reality. He worked methodically, cleaning tables as they emptied, but noticed how customers often had to wait longer than necessary because no one had bothered to clear and wipe their tables promptly. Thomas arrived late, offering no explanation as he rushed behind the counter. James overheard him complaining to Sarah about having to cover an extra shift. "The pay's barely worth it anyway," he muttered, loud enough for several customers to hear. And now that Jim's gone, Maria's acting like she owns the place. The irony of his statement might have been amusing if it hadn't been so revealing of the staff's attitude. As James wiped down tables, he became acutely aware of conversations that would have been hushed in his presence as manager. The staff spoke freely about their frustrations, but rarely about the actual work. Sarah complained about customers who expected their coffee too quickly. Thomas made jokes about the ridiculously picky regulars who insisted on specific drink temperatures or preparation methods, the very attention to detail that had once been the cafe's hallmark. The bathrooms proved to be particularly revealing. What should have been checked and cleaned regularly had clearly been neglected for days. James spent over an hour bringing them back to acceptable standards, all while hearing the staff chatting and laughing near the break room, seemingly unconcerned about the growing line of customers at the counter. During a mid-morning rush, James observed a scene that made his heart sink. Mr. Peterson, their faithful morning customer for over a decade, approached the counter with his usual order. The new barista, hired just before James's departure, stared blankly at him when he asked for his usual. "I've been getting the same thing here for 12 years, Mr. Peterson said, his voice tight with disappointment. "Dark roast coffee and a blueberry scone. Every morning." "Well, I've only been here 2 weeks," the barista responded with a shrug. "You'll have to tell me what you want." The interaction lacked any of the warmth or recognition that had once been the cafe's trademark. Mr. Peterson paid for his order and retreated to his usual corner, but James noticed he didn't unfold his newspaper as he usually did. Instead, he drank his coffee quickly and left, leaving half the scone untouched. Throughout the day, James witnessed countless small examples of the cafe's declining standards. Milk was steamed carelessly, resulting in burnt-tasting lattes. The coffee urns were left to go stale before being refreshed. Pastries were handled roughly, their careful presentation deteriorating with each passing hour. The staff seemed oblivious to these details, more concerned with their personal conversations and phone screens than the quality of service they were providing. James's hands had begun to crack from the harsh cleaning chemicals, his fingernails rough and broken in ways they had never been during his years as manager. Each morning, he applied healing cream to his palms before starting his shift, a physical reminder of his new reality. But the physical discomfort paled in comparison to the emotional strain of watching his beloved cafe crumble from the inside. The morning's first test came when he arrived to find yesterday's mop water still sitting in the bucket, dark and fetid. No one had bothered to empty it after closing. As he dumped the stagnant water, Thomas walked past, wrinkling his nose. "That's disgusting," he commented, making no move to help. "You should really empty that every night." James bit back the response that rose to his lips, reminding himself that James Wilson, the new cleaner, wouldn't know that Thomas had been responsible for closing duties the night before. The cafe's morning rhythm had deteriorated into a chaotic jumble of missteps and forgotten protocols. The coffee grinders hadn't been cleaned, leaving traces of old grounds to taint the day's first batches. James watched as customers winced at their first sips, some too polite to complain, others returning their drinks to an increasingly irritated staff. From his position near the condiment station, wiping down surfaces with methodical care, he heard every muttered comment about picky customers and impossible standards. Maria's attempt at management had devolved into a series of passive-aggressive notes posted around the cafe. "Clean the milk pitchers," screamed one note, its 3 exclamation points a testament to growing frustration. Yet James noticed the staff simply working around the crusty pitchers, each person assuming someone else would handle the cleaning. He finally cleaned them himself, carefully removing each layer of burnt milk while swallowing his rising anger. The regular customers had begun to notice the change. A group of retired teachers who had met at the cafe every Wednesday for years now huddled at their table, speaking in hushed tones about the declining service. "Remember when Jim would have our coffee ready before we even reached the counter?" one woman asked wistfully. "Now we're lucky if they even look up from their phones when we order." James kept his head down as he swept nearby, each word striking him like a physical blow. It was during one particularly trying morning that James first noticed Lily. She had been hired just before his departure as manager, and he hadn't had much chance to observe her work. Unlike the other staff members, she moved with purpose, her dark curly hair tied back neatly, her apron clean and pressed. While Sarah complained about the morning rush, Lily quietly restocked supplies and wiped down surfaces between customers. The first time she acknowledged James as more than just background furniture came when he was struggling with a particularly stubborn stain on the floor near the espresso machine. Without being asked, she brought him a special cleaning solution from behind the counter. "This works better on coffee stains," she said quietly, offering him a genuine smile. "I noticed it yesterday, when you were having trouble with a similar spot." The small act of kindness struck him deeply, not just for its rarity in the current atmosphere, but because it showed both awareness and initiative. As he worked the solution into the stain, he watched Lily interact with customers. She listened attentively to their orders, made suggestions when asked, and seemed to genuinely care about the quality of drinks she prepared. In her, James saw a glimmer of what the cafe had once been, what it could be again. The daily indignities of his position continued to accumulate. James found himself assigned the most unpleasant tasks without hesitation, cleaning up spills that others could have easily handled, dealing with overflowing trash bins that should have been emptied hours ago, scrubbing bathrooms that had been neglected far too long. Yet he noticed that Lily would often take care of small messes near her station rather than waiting for him, treating him with the same respect she showed everyone else. During a particularly busy afternoon, James overheard a heated discussion between Maria and Sarah about the schedule. "I can't work next Saturday," Sarah insisted, her voice carrying across the cafe. "I already told Jim about it weeks ago." Maria's frustrated response about having no record of the request devolved into a tense argument about proper procedures and favoritism. Meanwhile, customers shifted uncomfortably in line, the discord impossible to ignore. Lily, working nearby, quietly adjusted her own workflow to compensate for her distracted coworkers. She acknowledged waiting customers with warm smiles and apologetic glances, her efficiency providing a small counterbalance to the growing chaos. During a brief lull, she approached James as he cleaned nearby tables. "Would you like some fresh coffee?" she offered, holding out a cup. "I just made a new batch of the dark roast." The gesture almost broke his careful composure. It wasn't just the offer of coffee, it was the recognition of him as a person rather than just a function. As he accepted the cup, he noticed that she had made it exactly the way he used to drink it as manager, though he had never mentioned his preference in his new role. Her powers of observation clearly extended beyond just customer service. The contrast between Lily's approach and that of her coworkers became starker as the days passed. While others complained about customers who ordered complicated drinks, Lily took the time to perfect each preparation. When regulars came in, she made an effort to remember their preferences. She even started keeping notes about frequent customers' orders, something James himself had always encouraged but had rarely seen implemented since his supposed departure. One morning, James arrived to find Lily already there, earlier than her scheduled shift. She was cleaning the espresso machine with the kind of attention to detail he had always insisted upon as manager. When she saw him, she explained unprompted, "I noticed it wasn't running quite right yesterday afternoon. Thought I'd come in early to give it a proper cleaning before the rush." The machine's chrome surface gleamed under her care, a small island of excellence in the sea of mediocrity the cafe had become. The weight of his deception began to feel heavier in Lily's presence. Unlike his interactions with the other staff members, which only reinforced his decision to investigate undercover, each exchange with her made him question his approach. She represented hope, proof that the values he had tried to instill in the cafe could still take root in the right person. The annual Spring Arts Festival transformed the quiet neighborhood streets into a bustling carnival of color and activity. Vendors lined the sidewalks, local artists displayed their work in makeshift galleries, and crowds of visitors wandered between venues, many finding their way into Hawthorne's Corner Cafe seeking refreshment. The morning began with an overwhelming surge of customers that quickly exposed the staff's lack of preparation. James arrived early, knowing the day would bring unusual challenges. only to find the cafe in disarray before it even opened. The previous night's closing shift had left several tasks unfinished. The floors needed mopping, the condiment station was nearly empty, and the refrigerator cases were poorly stocked. Through the front windows, he could already see people gathering outside, the festival's early attendees eager for their morning coffee. Maria paced behind the counter, her anxiety evident as she tried to coordinate the morning preparations. Sarah called in late, citing festival traffic, while Thomas struggled to calibrate the espresso machine that hadn't been properly maintained all week. The line of customers grew longer before they even opened the doors, and James could sense the impending chaos. Lily arrived precisely on time, quickly assessing the situation. She caught James's eye as he mopped near the entrance, and he saw his own concern reflected in her expression. Without being asked, she began to help him prepare the cafe for opening, working efficiently to arrange tables and stock supplies. The simple act of cooperation felt like a lifeline in the growing storm. When the doors finally opened, the wave of customers crashed in like a tide. The line stretched to the door and beyond, festival goers mixing with regular patrons in an increasingly impatient crowd. The staff's usual inefficiencies became glaringly apparent under the increased pressure. Drinks were made incorrectly, then remade, creating delays that rippled through the entire service process. The pastry case emptied quickly, with no one remembering to restock it from the kitchen. James watched the situation deteriorate from his position near the condiment station, mechanically wiping tables and clearing dishes while his mind raced through the solutions he would have implemented as manager. When he heard Thomas curse softly as the espresso machine began to sputter, producing bitter shots that customers immediately returned, James knew he couldn't maintain his passive role any longer. "Excuse me," he said quietly to Thomas, keeping his voice different from his managerial tone. "I used to work with these machines. If you adjust the grind slightly and tamp with more pressure, it should help." Thomas looked skeptical but stepped aside, desperation overriding his usual dismissiveness. James demonstrated the technique, muscle memory taking over as his hands moved through the familiar motions. The next shot poured perfectly, rich crema floating on top. The small success created a moment of opportunity. As he stepped back, James added, "The machine works better if you purge it between shots, too." Thomas nodded, hardly paying attention as he rushed to clear the backlog of drink orders, but James noticed that he followed the advice, and the drinks improved noticeably. With the espresso machine functioning properly, James began to make other subtle suggestions. He reorganized the preparation area while cleaning, placing supplies within easier reach. He restocked the pastry case during a brief lull, arranging the items with the practiced eye of someone who knew which displays attracted customers. Each small intervention was offered quietly, presented as helpful suggestions from someone who had seen this done elsewhere. Lily picked up on his knowledge quickly, adapting his suggestions into her own workflow. She began coordinating with him silently, anticipating where help was needed most. Together, they created small pockets of efficiency in the chaos. Clear tables became available more quickly, drink orders moved through the production line more smoothly, and the overall atmosphere began to shift from panic to controlled busyness. Even Maria noticed the improvement, though she couldn't quite identify its source. During a brief moment between rushes, she approached James as he wiped down the counter. "You seem to know your way around a cafe," she observed, her tone mixing surprise with reluctant appreciation. "We could use an extra hand on bar if you're interested in picking up some barista shifts." The offer caught him off guard. It was the first time since starting his undercover role that anyone besides Lily had recognized his capabilities. For a moment, he was tempted to accept, to take a more active role in saving his cafe. But he knew it would only mask the deeper problems he needed to address. Instead, he demurred politely, claiming he preferred the simpler responsibilities of his current position. As the day progressed, the staff began to rely more on his quiet guidance. When the milk steamer clogged, he showed Sarah how to clean it properly. When the coffee grinder began producing inconsistent grounds, he adjusted it while pretending to clean nearby. Each intervention was met with increasing acceptance, the staff's initial dismissiveness giving way to a grudging respect. The festival crowds continued throughout the day, but the cafe had found a rhythm. Drinks were prepared more efficiently, tables were cleared more quickly, and customers began to comment on the improved service. James observed how the staff's body language changed. They stood straighter, moved with more purpose, took more pride in their work. It was a glimpse of what the cafe could be, what had been under his more active management. Lily caught his eye during a quiet moment, her expression thoughtful. "You know a lot more than you let on," she said softly, ensuring no one else could hear. "I've worked in several cafes, and I can tell when someone really understands how things should run." Her perception was uncomfortably accurate, and James focused on wiping the counter, unable to meet her knowing gaze. The day after the festival, reality crashed back like a cold wave. James arrived to find the cafe in worse condition than ever, with everyone too exhausted from yesterday's success to properly close. The temporary improvements had vanished like morning mist, leaving behind sticky floors, unwashed dishes, and the lingering smell of burnt coffee. Sarah arrived late again, this time not even bothering with an excuse. She slumped behind the counter, scrolling through her phone while customers waited. The pride and efficiency of yesterday had evaporated, replaced by an even deeper apathy, as if the staff were rebelling against their own moment of excellence. Thomas hadn't bothered to maintain the espresso machine settings James had shown him. The grinder had been readjusted to its previous incorrect setting, producing inconsistent grounds that resulted in bitter, watery shots. When a customer complained about their latte, Thomas rolled his eyes and muttered, "Some people are never happy," loud enough for others to hear. James moved through his cleaning routine mechanically, his mind wrestling with uncomfortable truths. The festival's success had proven what was possible. The staff could perform at a higher level when properly motivated and guided. But it had also revealed how deeply ingrained the problems had become. Without constant supervision and correction, they defaulted to their worst habits. While scrubbing dried milk from the steam wands, James overheard a conversation that crystallized his concerns. Two regular customers, both local business owners who had supported the cafe for years, were discussing their experience. "Yesterday was like the old days," one said, stirring her cooling coffee. "Remember how this place used to be? Always perfect coffee, staff who cared, everything spotless." Her companion nodded, pushing away a half-eaten scone. "Today it's back to normal though. Such a shame. I heard the owners never even here anymore, just lets the managers run it into the ground. My daughter says that new place downtown is much better." They gathered their belongings and left, the bell's chime marking another loss for the cafe. The words stung more than any physical discomfort from his manual labor. James had always taken pride in being a hands-on owner, even if his staff didn't know his true role. But hearing his absence described so dismissively made him question his entire approach. Had his desire to observe without interference actually contributed to the cafe's decline? Maria spent most of the morning in the office, door closed, presumably dealing with paperwork. When she did emerge, it was to post another strongly worded note about cleaning responsibilities. The staff ignored it just as they had ignored all the others. James watched as coffee spills dried untouched, crumbs accumulated under tables, and dirty dishes piled up in the sink. Only Lily maintained her standards, creating a small island of excellence amid the growing chaos. She cleaned as she worked, made drinks with care, and treated customers with genuine warmth. But her efforts only highlighted how far the rest of the operation had fallen. Customers gravitated to her section of the counter, waiting longer just to have her make their drinks, creating an imbalance that bred resentment among the other staff. During a brief lunch break, taken in the back alley where he used to sneak moments of quiet as manager, James pulled out his notebook. The pages were filled with observations, incidents, and patterns he'd documented over the past weeks. Reading through them now, he saw not just individual failures, but a systematic breakdown of everything his family had built. The cafe's reputation, carefully cultivated over 3 generations, was eroding daily. Each disappointed customer, each badly made drink, each dirty table chipped away at decades of goodwill. The festival had shown that the decline wasn't irreversible, but it had also revealed how fragile any improvement would be without fundamental changes. James watched as a new customer tried to ask Thomas about the coffee beans they used, a question that should have led to an enthusiastic discussion about their carefully chosen roasts. Instead, Thomas shrugged and pointed to the retail bags on the shelf, already turning away to resume his conversation with Sarah about weekend plans. The customer left without buying anything, the missed opportunity hanging in the air like the aroma of burnt coffee. The afternoon brought another telling incident. A longtime customer asked about the chocolate croissants that had once been a cafe specialty. "We stopped carrying those," Sarah responded casually. "They were too much trouble to keep stocked." James knew this wasn't true. The local bakery still made them, but someone had simply stopped ordering them, probably deeming them too expensive or too much work to maintain proper inventory. Each hour brought new evidence that the cafe's soul was slipping away. The warm community gathering place was becoming just another anonymous coffee shop, distinguished only by its slowly fading reputation. The walls, which had absorbed decades of conversations and laughter, now seemed to hold only echoes of what had been lost. As closing time approached, James watched the staff rush through their duties, cutting corners and leaving tasks undone for the morning crew. Even Maria seemed to have given up on maintaining standards, signing off on cleaning checklists without actually verifying that the work had been completed. Only Lily remained behind, quietly fixing what she could, though the magnitude of the problems was far beyond what one person could address. Standing in the darkened cafe after everyone had left, James made his decision. The temporary success of the festival had shown what was possible, but it had also revealed the futility of hoping things would improve on their own. His experiment in anonymous observation had served its purpose. Now it was time for action. The cafe needed more than just management. It needed resurrection. The morning James chose for his revelation dawned gray and cool, matching the gravity of his purpose. He arrived early, before any staff, and changed into his familiar manager's clothes in the small office bathroom. The transformation felt both foreign and deeply familiar, like stepping back into his own skin after weeks of masquerade. He carefully wiped away the last traces of his disguise, studying his reflection in the small mirror. The face that looked back at him carried the weight of everything he had witnessed. He had arranged for Maria to call an all-staff meeting before opening, citing inventory concerns. As employees filtered in, their reactions to seeing him behind the desk ranged from surprise to confusion. Sarah stopped mid-sentence in her conversation with Thomas, her phone dropping forgotten to her side. Maria hovered uncertainly in the doorway, her temporary authority evaporating in his presence. Only Lily's expression showed something different, a flash of understanding quickly masked, as if pieces of a puzzle had suddenly clicked into place. She took a position near the back of the group, her posture attentive but relaxed, unlike the nervous energy radiating from her coworkers. "Good morning," James began, his voice carrying the quiet authority they remembered from his days as manager. "I believe you all know me as Jim, the cafe manager. Some of you more recently knew me as James Wilson, the cleaning staff." He paused, letting the revelation sink in. Thomas's jaw dropped slightly, while Sarah's face flushed red. "What you might not know is that I'm also James Hawthorne, the owner of this cafe." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the usual morning street noise seemed muted, as if the world outside was holding its breath. James opened the leather-bound notebook that had documented their behavior over the past weeks, though he hardly needed to reference it. Every observation was etched in his memory. "I've spent the last 3 weeks watching this cafe, my family's legacy, slowly decline under your care," he continued, his voice level but firm. "I've cleaned up spills you ignored, fixed equipment you neglected, and watched customers who have supported us for years walk away disappointed. I've heard your complaints, your mockery of customers, and your disregard for the standards that built this cafe's reputation." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her gaze fixed on the floor. Thomas attempted a defensive posture, but couldn't quite maintain it under James's steady gaze. Maria's face showed a complex mixture of embarrassment and relief, as if she had known things were wrong but hadn't known how to fix them. The festival showed what this cafe could be, what it should be, every day. You all proved capable of excellence when properly motivated. But it shouldn't take a crisis or constant supervision to maintain basic standards of service and cleanliness. James stood, moving around the desk to face them directly. This isn't just a job. For 3 generations, this cafe has been a cornerstone of this community. Every customer who walks through that door trusts us with their morning ritual, their business meetings, their first dates, their quiet moments. He turned to each staff member in turn, addressing them individually. Sarah, you used to take pride in your latte art, in knowing customers' names and orders. Now you can barely look up from your phone long enough to acknowledge them. Sarah's flush deepened, but she met his gaze, a glimmer of her old enthusiasm flickering in her expression. Thomas, your attention to detail with equipment, your interest in learning about coffee, what happened to that dedication? Thomas straightened slightly, as if remembering the passion that had first brought him to the cafe. Maria, he continued, softening his tone slightly, I know I put you in a difficult position. Managing requires more than posting notes and hoping they'll be followed. It requires leading by example, something I failed to do by hiding in the background for so long. Finally, he turned to Lily. And Lily, who showed me that the spirit of this cafe isn't completely lost. Your dedication, your attention to detail, your genuine care for customers and coworkers alike. That's what Hawthorne's has always been about. James returned to his desk, pulling out a folder of documents he had prepared. Starting today, things will change. I'm offering each of you a choice. You can remain with us, under new standards and expectations that I'll outline in individual meetings, or you can leave with 2 weeks severance pay and a letter of reference reflecting your past contributions rather than recent performance. The tension in the room shifted, fear giving way to consideration. James continued, those who stay will need to relearn what made this cafe special. It won't be easy. We'll be retraining everyone, rebuilding our reputation one customer at a time. Lily will be taking over as head trainer and assistant manager, helping to restore the standards we once maintained without question. Lily's eyes widened slightly at the announcement, but her composed nod showed she had already been unconsciously preparing for such a role. The other staff members glanced at her with new respect, perhaps remembering how her quiet excellence had stood out during their recent decline. Take the day to think about it, James concluded. The cafe will remain closed today while I meet with each of you individually. Tomorrow, we either begin rebuilding together or we say goodbye and wish each other well. Either way, Hawthorne's Corner Cafe will return to what it once was, a place where every cup of coffee, every interaction, every detail matters. 3 months after James's revelation, Hawthorne's Corner Cafe hummed with renewed energy. The morning sunlight streamed through spotless windows, catching the steam rising from perfectly crafted drinks. The espresso machine gleamed like new, its chrome surface reflecting the careful attention it now received daily. The aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the air, unmarred by any hint of burning or staleness. Sarah had chosen to stay, rediscovering her passion for the craft under Lily's patient guidance. Her phone remained tucked away during shifts, her attention fully focused on each customer. She had revived her practice of keeping notes about regular customers' preferences, adding personal touches that made each interaction special. The morning rush now felt like a choreographed dance rather than chaos, with Sarah calling out greetings to familiar faces while her hands moved confidently through the drink preparation routine. Thomas, too, had found his way back to his earlier enthusiasm. The textbook still appeared during quiet moments, but now they shared space with coffee industry magazines and certification study guides. He had taken charge of equipment maintenance, treating each machine with the respect it deserved. His newfound expertise drew interested questions from customers, and he answered them with genuine enthusiasm, often sharing fascinating details about brewing methods and bean origins. Maria had chosen a different path, recognizing that management wasn't her true calling. She had accepted James's offer of severance with grace, making way for Lily's transition into leadership. Her departure had been amicable, marked by a genuine farewell gathering where she admitted that the cafe would be better served by someone with Lily's natural talent for leadership. Under Lily's guidance as assistant manager, the cafe had undergone a subtle but profound transformation. Her attention to detail proved contagious, inspiring the same care in others. New staff members, carefully selected and thoroughly trained, learn the cafe's history alongside its procedures. Each was taught not just how to make drinks, but why each step mattered, why every interaction counted. The physical space reflected the internal changes. Tables were immediately wiped clean after use, floors maintained their shine throughout the day, and the pastry case displayed treats that looked as delicious as they tasted. The local bakery had gladly resumed delivering their specialty items, including the chocolate croissants that had once again become a customer favorite. Mr. Peterson had returned to his morning routine, his newspaper once again a familiar sight in the corner. His coffee waited for him each morning, prepared exactly to his preference, accompanied by a warm greeting from staff who now understood the value of such relationships. The simple joy in his expression as he settled into his spot spoke volumes about the cafe's resurrection. James had found a new balance in his role as owner. No longer hiding in the background, he worked alongside his staff regularly, demonstrating the standards he expected while allowing Lily to handle day-to-day management. His presence served as a reminder of the cafe's legacy, but it was Lily's quiet leadership that maintained its renewed spirit. The two writers who had once abandoned the cafe for newer establishments had returned, drawn back by reports of positive changes. They now occupied their old table several times a week, their laptops sharing space with expertly crafted drinks. James occasionally caught fragments of their conversations about the cafe's transformation, their words carrying the weight of satisfied customers rather than disappointed regulars. The revival extended beyond just service and cleanliness. The cafe had reclaimed its role as a community hub. Local artists' work once again adorned the walls, carefully curated and regularly rotated. Weekly coffee tastings drew interested crowds, with Thomas and Lily sharing their knowledge of different roasts and brewing methods. The space hummed with the energy of a place that had rediscovered its purpose. Even the festival crowds had noticed the difference. During the recent Summer Arts Festival, the cafe had handled the rush with effortless efficiency. Customers remarked on the consistency of service, the cleanliness of the space, and the genuine warmth of the staff. The temporary success of the spring event had become the daily standard. James often found himself observing from different vantage points throughout the day, not as a disguised cleaner, but as a proud owner. He watched Lily mentor new staff members with the same patience and attention to detail she had always shown. He saw Sarah teaching a rookie barista the art of perfectly steamed milk, her instruction peppered with the same tips he had once taught her. The cycle of knowledge and care had been restored, strengthened by the hard lessons learned. The leather-bound notebook that had documented the cafe's decline now held different observations, notes about improvements, ideas for future enhancements, and records of particularly successful innovations. Its pages told the story of revival rather than decay, of tradition honored rather than abandoned. On quiet evenings, after the last customers had left and the closing tasks were being completed with careful attention, James would sometimes catch the scent of freshly ground coffee lingering in the air. In those moments, he could feel the presence of his grandfather and father, their vision for the cafe not just preserved but renewed. Hawthorne's Corner Cafe had found its way home, guided by the understanding that every detail, every interaction, and every cup of coffee was part of a legacy worth preserving. The bell above the door chimed with the same familiar tone it always had, but now it rang with promise rather than regret. Each new customer who entered found what James's family had always intended, not just a cafe, but a place where tradition and excellence met, where every detail mattered, and where the simple act of serving coffee was elevated to an art form.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.